Really.
But one important point I'd like to make, Mr. Whatever this board feels on this hour and this day, the construction of the Willits bypass is moving forward. I can't stop it. You can't stop it. It's moving forward. In any way. So it's really, at this point in time, it's really simple. It is a construction site.
To extend a bypass really started in 1955. I think it was Eddie Schmidbauer that said that easements were placed on his family's ranch back at that time. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, I took part in many meetings on the Willits bypass. And it's also along with the late 1990s and early 2000s. I felt very strongly about certain options and supported an alternative that was not selected. I represented agriculture at the time, and I talked about Little Lake Valley and how important that agricultural valley was and the wetlands. More recently in history, I also participated in meetings and discussed proposals concerning a Hopland bypass. So what do you think my message was there? The same thing about our agricultural lands and doing the best job that we can to find a proper location if there was going to be a bypass. So many of you that got up and spoke today, it was like me going back. I think Ellen Drell, David, remember my participation along with Bill Ray, because many times we met and discussed all the options and strategy and where to go, how to move forward. I do want to see a Willits bypass of some sort. And although what's being built isn't the option I felt was best, my decision here is going to be a very difficult one. But it's for me personally. But professionally, there has been commitments. That's where the final one was. One was no building a bypass. That was one of the alternatives of the time. I can see you shaking your head, Ellen. Yeah.
Please, Ellen, I'm sorry.
But I have to go in support to get this done. And so I am going to support the letter brought forward by Supervisor Pinches.
Shh. Over here, Supervisor Gjerde.
Pretty uncomfortable. So as many of you know, I have been a member of the Minnesota Council of Government since 2003. And let's go back a little bit in time here. So in 1997, Quentin Kopp, then a state senator, passed legislation that gave money to the Council of Governments. The Council of Governments are in every county, and they receive transportation dollars beginning in 1998. So in 1998, the Fort Bragg representative to the Minnesota Council of Governments was, I believe, the only person to vote against funding for the Willits bypass. And because it was the entire allotment, it was the entire $18 million that was going to the one project. After that, the project was in the planning stages, and there was a funding opportunity as the project cost went up for the California Transportation Commission to fully fund the funding gap. And at that point, I was on the MCOG representing the city of Fort Bragg. The Willits city representatives at the time were at least the ones at MCOG, and as far as I always have known, it was the majority of the Willits City Council were in favor of the Willits bypass. So hearing from them that that was the solution they wanted for Willits, I voted to support the grant application for the funding gap. It was also it had the support of the supervisor at the time. I believe Supervisor Pinches probably supported it before, but I wasn't in office at that time. And then it was Tom Lucier, and then it was Hal Wagonet, and now Supervisor Pinches again.
That was in the last century.
And there was also Supervisor Jim Eddy, who was 3rd District Supervisor at the time when the hearings were held.
So, so I realized from the testimony today that the project has evolved over time, but at different at the time that it came to MCOG, the request was strictly for funds. And so I voted to support the grant application. In the end, the application wasn't successful, and anyway, there was another funding cycle. MCOG had additional funds, and I did vote to give it money, I believe, twice since I've been on the board. And again, it was under the understanding that it was the clear majority of the Willits residents. I mean, Alan Drell and some other people, and David and others have gone to MCOG meetings, but you know, you're sitting with other people who are elected from a community, and you trust that they're representing the people who elected them. That said, you know, I understand some of the numbers about the transportation, you know, the numbers on the highway in Willits, and it's only about 22,000 vehicles a day. A 3-lane highway, 3-lane road, which is 2 lanes, 1 lane each direction and turn pocket, can handle about 20,000. So it's just barely over capacity. You could easily divert that traffic with connector streets that would parallel Main Street. And so first of all, I want to congratulate and compliment everybody here who has identified sort of some obvious facts, because these obvious facts, for whatever reason, have not been pursued by Caltrans and others. I'm just, this is kind of difficult because as some people have said, it's not easy to vote one way and then take new information in and look at things differently. I'm uncomfortable at this point knowing what I know about this project in signing a letter saying go for the project. That said, I think as Supervisor Pinch has mentioned, I think it's hard for me to imagine a scenario where it's not built, but I also don't feel comfortable signing the letter.
Okay. Supervisor McCowen. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know if there's ever been an issue of this level of importance where we've heard comment that's been so one-sided. But on the other hand, if the people who are in favor of the bypass had made an organized effort to turn people out, they could have turned out an equal amount or more.
But they didn't.
You know, it's we listened to you. Please listen to us. Thank you. There's a lot of things about this project that I don't like. It's not the ideal bypass project probably in anyone's mind. I got over the idea a few years ago that there's no Highway 20 interchange, which I think is you know, not consistent with the purpose of having a bypass. If it's to get traffic through town and around town, you know, it hasn't achieved that to the optimum level. But I also think that a lot of the arguments that we hear are contradictory to each other. You know, we've heard every conceivable argument today against the bypass, and probably 95% of it are the same things that have been said for at least 10 years, in some cases 20 years. But we hear that the bypass won't solve the traffic problem in Willits, and yet, because it's really not going to take that many cars out of town, and yet it's going to devastate the economy because it takes the cars out of town. Both of those can't be true. You know, I am concerned that the alternatives that have been suggested don't really address the problem for US 101. They may address a lot of the problems for Willits, but I don't think they do it completely. And the Bechtel Road, Railroad Avenue route is not really a truck route. It's kind of the opposite of a truck route. It's got 6 roundabouts. It's got traffic calming measures. Roundabouts themselves are a traffic calming measure. So then some say, well, we build the Bechtel Avenue and the railroad, or Bechtel and Railroad Avenue, and then we build a truck route too. And every one of those things you do is going to have its own impacts to the community, and it's going to have direct impacts to the people that are living on those streets that are intended to become the alternate north-south route. And I think and Willits, I think, needs to do some of those things, whether there's a bypass or not a bypass. But when the day comes that you're actually talking about doing those things, you'll see a lot of people stand up and say you can't do it because it's going to have these impacts and these impacts and these impacts. And in fact, that's why a lot of those alternatives were considered and then not included in the EIR, is because of the impacts that they had, including environmental justice impacts of putting a major route through a low-income neighborhood. And you can all shake your heads, but that's part of the reality of it. And my concern is that we are not looking at a choice between the ideal bypass and the proposed route. We are looking at a choice between the proposed route and no bypass. And I personally don't find a continuation of the status quo for the next 20 years to be acceptable. And I think that's what we're looking at. So, and supporting the letter, it's, I don't think that supporting it or not supporting it is going to have a direct impact on the project. The project is going forward. It's not a decision that was made by the Board of Supervisors. We are, by supporting this letter, if that's what the board does, it is reaffirming our historic support for the bypass project and the commitment of over $30 million in funds. And they've been spending our money first. I believe over half of it has already been spent on the right-of-way acquisition. And again, if this project doesn't go forward, I think you'll get a continuation of status quo for 20 years with everyone idling through town with the heavy trucks. And the one city, one vision, which I also took a look at, one of the recurrent comments of what people wanted to do was get the trucks out of town. And a bypass is the only way that you get the through trucks out of town. And the comments that 70% of the trucks will still be in town, that was done with someone standing on a street corner writing things down on the back of an envelope. I think that one's going to Fort Bragg. I think that one's going to Eureka. I believe that you'll see far more of the truck traffic will be out of town. And but again, to me, it's not a choice between is there a better alternative or this proposed bypass. It's this proposed bypass or nothing. So I will vote to support the letter.
Well, I have to say that when I saw Senator Evans' letter a week or two ago, I was kind of shocked because I had known that this Willits bypass thing had been in motion for so many years. And, I came on the board in 2011, and the Willits bypass had been around for many, many years while I was not part of county government, and I considered this something basically that MCOG was working on. And of course, at the last MCOG meeting, which was just a week or two ago, there was a letter that was written. I think Supervisor Pinches had a lot to do with that letter, but that was basically to address the comments that had been made by Senator Evans, which seemed to me to be kind of late to the process, just because I knew this had been going on for so many years, and I had always heard, mostly through people who were sitting on MCOG, that countless different options had been considered and all these environmental studies had been done and this and that and the other. And what was really surprising to me just over the last week or so has been at this very late hour, when Caltrans is beginning construction, that this movement has just kind of blossomed. If it's been going on for 10 years at this kind of level and this kind of scrutiny of the project, I was certainly not aware of that. So I do think there's a real problem, with timing. Now, I wouldn't say that that it's this way, this highway or no highway, this bypass or no bypass, because I don't know what's going to happen on June 7th when this matter gets to court. I don't know what's going to happen as a result of these very vigorous protests that are ongoing at the site. I don't know what you can do. I don't think that, the Board of Supervisors and whether, this letter is signed and sent to Malcolm Doherty or not is going to make a whole heck of a lot of difference in whether the Willits bypass project goes through or not. I do have to say, though, that I do agree with what Supervisor McCowen said. If the people who were in favor of this project had brought all their folks together and come down here, they might have made, this was a very one-sided presentation. We didn't hear from the people who were for it, and I'm sure they're up there, and I'm sure there's people who are for it. But I do have to say, though, that I heard so many concerns raised today. I think the overarching concern to me is whether we are building something that maybe would have been appropriate a couple of decades ago. But now, as we're kind of trying to move into this, or at least in my political mind, we're trying to move into sort of this more localized culture, this sort of post-petroleum age. I know it's not going to happen in the next 5 years or even 10 years, but we are trying, if we want to survive, and there were several people who spoke to this, we are trying to create a different paradigm. And to me, this project, as it's conceived, does not contribute to that new paradigm. And I'm really sorry to say that, because I have a huge amount of respect for my colleague from Willits, and I know this is a project that he supports really strongly, and I understand his support. And I've talked to other people in Willits who are big supporters of this project. None of them made it down here today. I'm not totally sure why. But, there was a kind of, speaker after speaker after speaker after speaker today that I think finally wore me down. And I'm not sure that nothing can be done. And so it's in that spirit that maybe something can be done to make this project more in keeping with the kind of vision that I have for the future of Mendocino County. I'm not a Willits person. I'm not a Little Lake Valley person, but I know what you're talking about. I understand the language you're using when you talk about trying to create a different opportunity for generations to come, and also the very real thing that's happening, which is an overall alarming deterioration of our planet on every level. And those things speak very dearly to my heart, and so I'm inclined to join my colleague from the 4th District. So with that, do we have a motion on the floor?
I'll make the motion, Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
we have a motion from
To send the letter.
Supervisor Pinch to send the letter, and a second. And a second from Supervisor Brown. And any further comments from board members?
Well, like I say, the project is underway. It's the area of the construction site is secured. All this letter does is basically reaffirm the previous board's supervisors and MCOGs and the city of Willits' commitment to the project. It's a very simple letter. I mean, there may be changes. It might be stopped at the court hearing in June. I mean, who knows? But all this letter does, but what was important to me is to make sure that the project site, I mean, and you know, we talked about through MCOG, and Dan, you've been on MCOG a long while. If we can't plan and design and go through the environmental process of projects anymore, we're always a state. Our Congress, or our state Senate, just approved $8.6 billion spending plan the same week that Noreen Evans sent this letter in the same week. And if we can't move forward with projects, whether you like them or you don't like them, and have 14 years of process, and then finally decide, yes, we want to do it, where are we? Why should we have MCOG if planning and moving project forward aren't there? If you don't go through that process, then why don't we abandon MCOG or abandon local projects? Did you see how we get to the date of construction? Well, we've committed the money, but let's wait and see if we're going to do anything. I mean, is that the type of process we want to set up?
Any other comment?
Well,
yes, Supervisor Gjerde.
just I believe in the planning process, and one of the things I believe about the planning process is that you can get community buy-in into a solution to a problem. And you know, clearly today we heard, and we've been seeing in the last week or so, a community that has not bought into this project to the extent that I would have expected.
Well, I disagree, Dan, because I've been through a couple of elections in the Willis Valley, and I always come up on top because of the Willis bypass area. So I appreciate 100 people coming here. I appreciate 100 people come here, but they're not in the majority of the Willis Valley.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor and a second, and we will vote. Oh, Supervisor McCowen?
Well, I just want to say, you know, there was an extensive, extended community process, and some people came to the community after that happened or during while that happened, or they didn't start paying attention until after it happened. But, you know, I do kind of think at some point there needs to be some finality to the process. And so we have remedies if people think that process was in error, if they think that the impacts weren't adequately considered or mitigated, they can file suit and challenge it in a court of law. And that process is taking place. And that's really the appropriate arena at this point for the final decision to be made. But I think it's, you know, it's unfortunate if we have members of the board who back away from a position that they might have had a day ago simply because they heard 50 people speaking to one side of an issue and not hearing both sides of the issue. So part of political courage is the willingness to stand up to a room full of people and vote against what they want. That can be courageous also.
Supervisor Pinchas?
I'd like to call the vote now. I'd like a quick question.
You want to call the vote?
Well, I don't think we have the majority here.
Wait a second.
Mr. Chairman, I want to call for the vote because I think it's too late in the day to ask for a political contribution.
That was a joke.
That was a joke.
Okay.
John?
I don't want to go into this anymore. I don't want to hear any more jokes. I don't want to hear anybody malign each other's political courage. You know, we all have different ways that we come to our decisions, and you know, I think that my decision has every bit as much validity as any other supervisor's. You know, it's all based on my experience, my life, the things I've learned, the people I've talked to, the things I've read. So, you know, we all have to live with our decisions. So, vote by the button. And the motion carries 3-2.
Supervisors Hamburg and Gjerde dissenting.
Okay, and where are we going now?
Mr. Chair, I think it might be time to
Thank
do
you all for being here today.
Supervisor Brown's CSAC item.
The directors,
Please. Please.
No, we have to finish this.
we do have item 5G, which is presentation regarding the donation of 6 historical state of California maps.
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, we're going to put that item off until Mr. Beltrami
Right.
can be here.
Mr. Beltrami was not available.
Oh.
The next item